the most crucial aspects of security, particularly around critical infrastructure, is taking a holistic approach. This speaker next coming up joined the Department of Home Affairs in 2013, focusing on international engagement, audit and assurance and delivering complex programs. Now she leads the department's regulatory compliance functions related to critical infrastructure. Would you please welcome First Assistant Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, Justine Jones.
Good morning, everybody. I'd firstly like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation, and I also acknowledge their elders past and present, and would like to welcome any other First Nations people who may be present here today. I have woken up this morning with a lurgy, so you're going to have to bear with me, and if you were expecting my usual sparkly public servant self, you'll probably be a little disappointed that I'm not quite as sparkly as usual. And on top of that, I'll be talking about government policy, legislation and regulation. So please stay with me. I promise that I won't stick too much into the less exciting public service domain there. But as Tracy said, I head the Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security Centre in the Department of Home Affairs, and I'm responsible for the regulation of aviation and maritime security, the security of critical infrastructure and telecommunications security, amongst other things. I also am responsible for the government's national security background checking service, which is called AUSCHEC. And also we do risk assessment work that looks at both foreign investment review board cases for investment in Australia, but also risk assessment work that informs government, whole of government policy more broadly. So in the CISC, our mission is to ensure the continuity, security and resilience of Australia's critical infrastructure and to advance our national security, economy and social prosperity in the best interests of the Australian community. We do this in collaboration with Australia's critical infrastructure owners and operators and support them to understand the risk environment and meet their regulatory requirements. Today I'll give you some insights into some of the things that are keeping my government and industry colleagues awake at night and what we're doing about it. And I'm sure that many of these threats and risks are things that are also front of mind for you. The technological advancements we now have would have been a work of science fiction when I was a kid, but now more than ever we need people to understand threat and vulnerabilities and to respond in real-time situations to mitigate risk and harm. Sadly, there's been a number of incidents in recent times that are making this very real for many of us in the security and the security regulation space. And at the heart of what we do is to protect people from harm. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of opportunity over the next couple of days to discuss these issues in more detail. Now, I am a bureaucrat and a regulator, so as I said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the government's legal and policy framework. SOCI, it's a very cute name, acronyms, we love acronyms in the public service. So SOCI is the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, and that was introduced in 2018, and it's the key framework for regulating the security of Australia's critical infrastructure assets. So under the SOCI Act, we have 11 sectors and 22 asset classes that are defined in the legislation. And as you can see from this graphic, it includes energy, transport, communications, financial services and data storage and processing, amongst other industry sectors. Historically, Australia's principal national security concerns centred around terrorism. This has been and continues to be the primary risk in aviation security following the events in 9/11 that impacted aviation security globally. And when the SOCI laws were introduced in 2018, the initial focus was to address the risk to critical infrastructure from espionage and foreign interference. However, SOCI now takes what we call an all-hazards approach. This means that we want our critical infrastructure assets to manage the risks related to a range of threats, natural hazards such as bushfires and floods, personnel, both trusted insiders and bad faith actors, cyber and data protection, supply chains, and from a geopolitical and foreign interference perspective, espionage and sabotage. Since its introduction in 2018, the SOCI Act has been amended twice in order to keep pace with the evolving threat landscape, and additional reforms are underway as we speak. The reforms will introduce more measures to mitigate the risks to Australia's critical infrastructure and ensure the government has the information required to manage national security risks and appropriate and proportionate powers to respond to any risks posed. I mentioned earlier that government works closely with industry to uplift its security capability. The end of the 23-24 financial year marked the introduction of the government's Critical Infrastructure Risk Management Program as part of the government's regulatory framework. And entities are now required to adopt and maintain an all-hazards risk management plan as part of their obligations under this Act. And an annual report, including an attestation by the company's board, is to be provided to government. Importantly, the responsible critical infrastructure entities had until the 17th of August this year to implement their chosen cyber security framework. Now, not all businesses are captured by the RMP obligations, but we are encouraging critical infrastructure assets to have robust risk management practices to ensure the continuity of essential services that our communities and economy rely on, to recover more quickly from incidents that may impact a critical infrastructure asset, and to protect their business's reputation and financial viability. The SOCI regulatory framework is designed to recognise that responsible entities are best placed to understand their operating environment, the threats and vulnerabilities, and to develop a risk management plan that is fit for purpose. So education and awareness of the threat and risk environment is a key element of the government's work with industry to protect Australia's critical infrastructure security. What we find when we talk to our industry partners is that they are crying out for information about threat. Some of that information, by its very nature, is classified information that the government has a tight rein on. But more and more, we have both employees in organisations of critical infrastructure assets and some of their senior managers getting government-issued security clearances at quite high levels so they can fully understand the threat environment. I love this graphic because when I first saw it, I was quite taken aback looking in a global sense about what countries in the world provide critical minerals for use in manufacturing and other sectors. And it illustrates how reliant countries are on critical components and services. This is actually extracted from our Critical Infrastructure Annual Risk Review that was released last year to provide a summary of the key risk-driven issues affecting critical infrastructure security. The second edition will be released later this year. The review is a sector-specific analysis encompassing all hazards to Australian critical infrastructure and supply chains and presents a number of key findings, including that foreign involvement is permeating into all areas of Australia's critical infrastructure. Post-pandemic, corporate activity is increasing the touch points for foreign government contact and influence, and collectively, trusted insiders are one of the most attractive targets for malicious foreign actors. The risk review also explores the interconnectedness of the various sectors and the upstream and downstream impacts on a number of sectors should one sector be impacted by an incident, outage or significant disruption. The increasingly interconnected nature of Australia's critical infrastructure exposes vulnerabilities which, if targeted, could result in significant consequences for our economy, security and sovereignty. Impacts experienced in one sector would likely be magnified across sectors through a creeping dependency, a growth of interdependent critical infrastructure systems. And Australia remains vulnerable to international supply chain disruption, particularly single-source supply of critical components and services. Single-source supply chains are highly vulnerable to manufacturers halting or limiting production in response to domestic policies, geopolitical pressures and global shortages, or disruptions to third-party suppliers. Critical infrastructure providers need to develop adaptive supply chain resilience plans driven by risk analysis to withstand disruption to global supply chain networks. Across most critical infrastructure sectors, vulnerabilities can easily be exposed if adequate contingencies, alternatives or backups are not in place to address long-term shortage of critical components. And identifying these vulnerabilities, having contingencies in place and not relying solely on stockpiling form part of the risk management strategy to uplift supply chain resilience to ensure a proactive approach to potential disruptions. The blue screen of death. You might know where I'm going here. Regardless of the cause of a disruption or outage, any incident can have a cascading impact across various sectors due to the nature of these globally interconnected networks. Hands up if you were impacted by the CrowdStrike incident in July. Either your business that you work for, or perhaps you had a flight cancelled or could possibly not pay some bills or do the shopping. Oh, it's not too many. I'm surprised about that. As you would know from all the media around it, global American cloud-based cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike issued a sensor configuration update, and the update created a global technical outage in one of their products, which provides a security platform that consolidates siloed security tools and data. Please don't ask me to explain in any further detail what that means. The update, their product is often embedded deep into the systems of companies deploying and managing sensors. CrowdStrike's sensor configuration update applied only to Windows systems, and the update triggered a logic error resulting in a systems crash and the blue screen of death on impacted systems. I've heard that only a relatively small proportion of Microsoft users globally were impacted, so can you imagine what chaos could ensue if a similar incident was to occur with a more significant and widespread impact? CrowdStrike confirmed that this incident occurred due to a misconfiguration that their testing did not pick up before deployment. They quickly provided a technical remediation to fix the issue that worked for the majority of customers, and confirmed, importantly, that the incident was not a malicious cyber attack. However, this incident demonstrated the fragility of a networked and interdependent Australian economy. In this instance, the chaos of the outage significantly impacted a range of critical infrastructure assets, including severe disruptions to the transport sector. But fortunately, essential services such as 000 were not impacted. This type of outage also exposed concurrent security vulnerabilities, with the increased reliance on manual processes and operational contingencies adding to the potential security impacts of the incident. At this point, I want to give a quick plug to the government's National Coordination Mechanism, if you're not familiar with it. This was established during the pandemic, and the NCM, another acronym, as we call it, was quickly stood up in the case of CrowdStrike to ensure that cross-sectoral equities were able to be shared across industry and government. The NCM is essentially a mechanism where reps from all critical infrastructure sectors, state and federal governments and others come together at very short notice. The impacted entity generally comes along to, and they did in the case of CrowdStrike, will come along to the NCM meeting. And that enables a wide range of interested and affected stakeholders to quickly know the facts of what's going on, what the plan is to respond to the incident, and very importantly, the communication strategy around that. This is the benefit of Australia being a relatively small country, and highlights the work that the federal government has done to lead and connect all relevant parties who have an interest in incident response and communications at a national level. So threats to critical infrastructure can come from a range of places. In the case of the CrowdStrike outage, initial reactions of many Australians and people around the world was to assume it was a deliberate cyber attack. Security incidents, however, can be caused inadvertently through human error or systems failure, or by deliberate or intentional acts by an entity or an individual or even a foreign state actor. This can dramatically impact how you may respond to the incident. There are a number of government agencies that contribute to assessing the current threat landscape in Australia. In the ASIO latest annual report, Director General Burgess wrote that we anticipate foreign powers will increase their efforts to conduct espionage and target Australia's defence systems and critical infrastructure. The Director General stated during his 2024 annual threat assessment that ASIO is aware of one nation state conducting multiple attempts to scan critical infrastructure in Australia and other countries, targeting water, transport and energy networks. There are cyber teams in multiple countries scanning for vulnerabilities in Australia's critical infrastructure. The Australian Cyber Centre's latest annual cyber threat report at the end of the 22-23 financial year stated that they received nearly 94,000 cybercrime reports, and that was an increase of 23% from the previous financial year. They also responded to 143 cybersecurity incidents related to critical infrastructure. There have been many high-profile cyber attacks and data breaches, and unfortunately they will continue. In April this year, MediSecure advised the government that approximately 12.9 million individuals may have had their personal information exposed. A MediSecure database containing personal and health information of individuals and healthcare provider information had been affected by this cyber security incident. In this case, a database server had been encrypted by suspected ransomware. Medicare card details, including numbers, individual identifiers and expiry dates, have been identified in this data breach. A range of details associated with prescriptions may have also been impacted. The National Office of Cyber Security, which is co-located in the Department of Home Affairs with the CISC, where I work, through the National Coordination Mechanism that I mentioned before, they held more than 30 coordination meetings with government and industry stakeholders and worked closely with MediSecure and its administrators, to understand and manage the impacts of this incident and to facilitate engagement across governments in its response. The Australian Cyber Security Centre is continuing to provide technical advice and support. The AFP is continuing to investigate the incident, and at this time the Australian Government is not aware of publication of the full data set. In the wake of this cyber attack, MediSecure announced that administrators and liquidators had been appointed, due in part to the significant costs involved in responding to the latest cyber incident. And of course, the impacts to the Australian public from the data breach are less quantifiable. I know Taylor Swift and ASIO don't necessarily go hand in hand, but as Tracy mentioned in her introductory comments, ASIO also recently announced that Australia's national terrorism threat level has been raised from possible to probable. ASIO advised that a terrorist attack is most likely to be conducted by a lone actor or a small group in a crowded place. The attacks are difficult to detect and may occur with little or no warning. While not terrorist attacks, the recent stabbing attack in Leicester Square of an Australian child and the Bondi Westfield stabbing attack earlier this year, both by lone actors, are sadly examples of the threat environment, including for many of your organisations. Earlier this month, authorities in Austria, with assistance from the international intelligence community, thwarted an attempt to carry out a terrorist attack at the Taylor Swift concert scheduled in Vienna. The target of stadium concerts is an ongoing security challenge for mass gatherings of people at and around the venue, as well as overcrowding of transport infrastructure. And it was reported in the media that trusted insiders had gained jobs as event service providers at the stadium, and with the sold-out stadium concert, the consequences, of course, could have been catastrophic. With Australia raising the threat level to probable, this serves as a reminder to all of us of the importance of remaining vigilant when developing and updating risk management strategies, and how preparedness is vital in reducing the likelihood of attacks of this nature against Australia's critical infrastructure and at key public events. Personnel risk management is one of our all hazards vectors. It is a crucial function of organisations within our critical infrastructure sectors to reduce the risk of employees or contractors maliciously or unwittingly compromising the security of sensitive information and data. This may include malicious, negligent or unwitting acts by individuals with legitimate access and privileged knowledge. Such acts lead to impacts that compromise the proper function of or cause significant damage to critical assets and services. However, as you know, insider threats are not always malicious and can be unintentional, as is in the case of a staff member clicking on a link in a phishing scam and potentially causing a cyber incident. You would have seen in the news the recent Cairns helicopter incident where an employee was able to gain unauthorised access to a helicopter outside of operating hours, even though he was not employed as a pilot in that business. Sadly, the unauthorised pilot lost his life, but fortunately there were no major injuries to the people in the Cairns hotel or on the ground. This incident could have been a lot worse and reminds us of the importance of physical and personnel security in locking down physical assets only to those who require access. If a trusted insider had chosen to target a heavily populated area or target key critical infrastructure assets, this could have a significant impact. Protect what is valuable. I really like this as a bit of a motto in the security industry. A key role of the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Centre is to share threat information and increase awareness with our stakeholders of the risks to critical infrastructure and to collaborate with industry on how we can support security uplift practices. There has been a shift in more recent times globally and in Australia to publicly call out foreign interference to alert industry to potential security threats. And while ASIAL's terrorism threat level has been moved to probable, the foreign interference level is certain, with a great risk for critical industries. And security professionals must ask themselves, what would a foreign government want from me? Limiting access to those people in an organisation who have an operational need or a need to know is necessary to protect sensitive information and data. Similarly, access control and managing physical security appropriately will mitigate the risk of insider threats. I cannot understate the importance of having a strong security culture where all employees and contractors and visitors, now that I say that, are responsible for understanding, recognising and valuing the need to protect our organisations from threats. Workforce issues can impact critical infrastructure sectors and create vulnerabilities where there is poor culture, high turnover rates, a lack of training and the means to access sensitive information without appropriate security clearances, background checks or information handling knowledge. Staffing shortages across all critical infrastructure sectors are likely to worsen over the next couple of years, with regional services expected to be impacted more acutely. Organisations that rely on inadequately skilled personnel can further exacerbate operational risk and insider risk from disgruntled employees. Not all responsible critical infrastructure entities are obligated to utilise background checking services to manage personnel risks, but we expect entities to have robust risk management plans in place and practices to carefully consider which roles may need higher levels of personnel security. When I think about protect what is valuable, I would also add to this list an organisation's reputation and financial viability. As we were talking about in the MediSecure example earlier, a significant impact security incident can have a big hit on the bottom line of an organisation, both from a fiscal perspective, but also their reputation. And in MediSecure's case, of course, they went into voluntary administration. I suppose the tricky part of this is that, you know, organisations should not under-invest in what they need to have a strong security culture and risk mitigations in place to protect their organisation from risk. Uplifting security is not just about risk management programs or plans, but where the public and private spheres are working together seamlessly to create an environment in which we're constantly thinking about security risk, understanding how we go about managing and mitigating it, and making sure we're working together on learning the right lessons. The security industry is not a set and forget environment. You have to be constantly rechecking security settings, improving the security culture, staff wellbeing, workplace culture and risk management practices are all important to adequately mitigate against potential threats. Fair remuneration, training and support to employees addresses the potential risk of discontent employees negatively impacting the security of an organisation. And a strong security culture should be viewed as part of the fabric of an organisation. I was pleased to hear one of our critical infrastructure entities tell me recently that in their latest contracts for security personnel that they are paying higher wages or higher contract costs to ensure there's higher wages paid to the contractors, and they're having their contracted staff wear clothing with the logo of the company they are working for so that the security staff feel part of the culture of the organisation that they're there to protect. I will make the point that employers, and this includes government, we cannot contract out risk. So the employers that use contracted service providers are still responsible for managing the risk to their organisation. You can't contract it out. And as I mentioned before, it's quite important to consider the cost. When you think about the cost of an incident happening to the organisation, you really do want to think about how you can resource and get company boards and everything across the areas that we need to support better risk management practices, particularly in the cyberspace. So we cannot be experts. The government can't be experts in your business security controls and practices. They need to come from your organisation. However, we do work closely with industry, as I said, through engagement and guidance to ensure security uplift to meet the threat landscape we're all facing. The government's model of engagement with industry is through what we call trusted information sharing networks. And the government invests a lot of time and effort and resourcing into making sure that we meet regularly with industries to help them not only hear updates from the government on threat information, but also, importantly, to share best practice within their own organisations. It's been quite interesting, and the feedback when I've gone and spoken to our industry representatives that are at these, what we call TISN meetings, they're done at a sectoral level. So each of those 11 sectors will have their own TISN, which will have has a co-chair arrangement between the government and a member of that industry sector. And they are continuing to evolve into very open, collaborative information sharing spaces where people who potentially are competitive in a commercial sense are actually now sharing more and more information about how they manage risk. Incident response, we've been fortunate enough that some of the big companies in Australia who have been significantly impacted by cyber incidents also come and do presentations at these meetings to ensure that people can get a sense of what it's like to be in the heat of responding to a significant cyber attack. Before, when John mentioned the comments about the MPSA, one of the feedback that is coming back to our department about the layers from industry is about the layers of regulation. Clearly some of the industry sectors that we are talking about that are critical infrastructure sectors are highly regulated, and it is an area that we too in the federal government are interested in seeing how we can look at streamlining regulation. Very difficult task to do, of course, across state and federal jurisdictions, but mindful of the fact that we currently have impediments in regulatory practices that may actually hold us back from effective incident response, in particular to a cyber attack, for example. So the layers of regulation, there's also a cost piece there too, of course, which, again, going back to the need for organisations to invest in security, that's often not an area that gets, top of the list in terms of what boards are looking at in terms of where their investment needs to be, particularly to meet their regulatory requirements. So they are all issues that we are very engaged and interested in talking to our stakeholders more about. And I do thank ASIAL for its work on leading some of this. So through the TISNs, as I said, we get all these people together and we talk about the risks. I've been fascinated by some of them. One of the things that came up as being like top on the list for some of the sectors is copper theft, for example. Equally, there is deliberate sabotage happening to telecommunications towers and things like that at the moment, which the respective law enforcement agencies are investigating. But these are the types of things that organisations are talking about in these sectoral meetings, as well as the TISNs for all the sectors, and we hold those regularly. There's also a range of webinars, workshops, conferences, and a lot of guidance material on the department's website. So the engagement, education and awareness is a key part of what is the SOCI compliance or regulatory posture at the moment. We're more about uplifting industry rather than what you would say is a more traditional compliance and enforcement regime that some of you may be familiar with through other regulatory models. And the reason for that is there's a lot at stake here, and it's not an area that the government can effectively regulate in that same strict compliance focused way. It's really about ensuring that businesses have all the information they need and have good practices in place to manage their own risks. One part that I'll add that is an area that still needs a lot more thinking through is the interconnectedness piece, and again across those sectors. As you know, they are all completely independent, and CrowdStrike did demonstrate that as well. So that's an area that the government's keen to keep exploring with industry, and to have things like preparedness and playbooks kind of developed that actually are based on potential scenarios of what happens when one critical infrastructure asset goes down or there's an outage for whatever reason. So finally, as I said, there are our channels, X, LinkedIn, Instagram. There's a Trusted Insider podcast that's also on our website. But I'd like to finish today by saying thank you to all the great work you all do to improve security outcomes for the Australian community, and taking time to come to this event to discuss the important topics and contribute your insights and experiences as you network with colleagues. And thank you, ASIAL, for inviting me to speak today.
Justine, thank you so much for coming along, even though you're not well. We are so grateful for your time. I've got a few questions here that I've been jotting down while listening to you, because I'm fascinated by this topic. But does anyone have a question from the floor, or would you like to put a question in the app? You go into the agenda section and then click on Q&A. If you have a question from the floor, just shoot your hand up and we'll get you a microphone ASAP. Any questions from the floor? Yes, thank you very much. We'll get a microphone down to you. Brenda's coming now. Thank you.
And I will caveat that in true public service style, I will not be the expert on everything, because there's many colleagues back in the workplace who have different areas of expertise in this space, but I'll do my very best.
Love a caveat. Thank you.
Hello. Justine, my name's Sean Cannon. I'm from Energy Queensland. Just in relation to your statement, one state government is targeting Australia. Which state government?
Look, I think, again, I can't really talk, to the ASIO threat assessment work, but I think I have actually been at the sessions that the Director-General has talked about this, their public sessions, and I think that while I'm not sure now, and sorry, correct me, I'm not sure if he has subsequently come out on the record. He was certainly pressured to, but you might want to check that yourself online. But certainly when we talk about the threats to critical infrastructure, they could come from many different other countries, and probably the ones that we are most concerned about is whether there's the potential for foreign ownership, control and influence. So if it's a country where they could direct their own citizens, for example, to do something that's in their state's national interest.
Thank you.
And thank you for the question. Who else would like to ask a question, either from the floor or in the app? If you think about one in the next couple of minutes, shoot your hand up. I've got one here. Justine, in a perfect world, how often should organisations be updating their risk management plans?
Well, that's a great question, Tracy. I think that clearly annually, I would think would be, because it would just be part of good administrative practices for the organisation. But more importantly, it would be whenever you think there's a change in the threat situation, or there's something environmentally that has happened that makes you think that you might need to think about the vulnerabilities to your own organisation in a different way. So, as an example, when the Director General raised the terrorism alert to probable, we sent out advices to all the industry sectors, particularly aviation and maritime security, to say, dust off your risk management plans and look at what it means for your own business now, the elevation in the risk profile.
Makes sense. Looking into your crystal ball, because you've got so much experience in this area, what do you see happening with both cyber threats and cyber breaches in the next 5-10 years?
Look, again, a great question, and I am by no means a cyber expert, but the colleagues that I work with, both in the Signals Directorate and also our National Office of the Cyber Coordinator, basically say they expect it just to get worse. It's going to increase these types of risks. They're not going to go away. So really what we all have to do is strengthen our own risk management processes to actually try to mitigate the risks of that, and then know how to respond. Have contingencies in place, think through what it looks like if you get a cyber incident and what happens to your organisation in response to that, because it's only going to keep on going. Unfortunately, the cyber space, if anyone's got, kids thinking about what to do as a career, the cyber space is the way to go. And I'm not talking necessarily about what and don't what I would say is the nerdier side. They're not your potential hackers that are spending all their time war gaming instead of doing their prep for the Year 12 exams. What I'm saying is the cyber industry as a whole is booming, and one of the areas that we are very focused on, and we hear a lot, the government is, and hear a lot from industry, is that they don't have enough cyber experts within their organisation, and how can the government assist industry to have more people trained to deal with this ongoing threat that's just becoming more and more prevalent.
It's a great call out in the room for any of you there who have teenage kids. Oh, we have another question.
We do.
Thank you.
This is working? Yes, wonderful. Jason Brown, Justine. Thanks for the run-through of the work the Home Affairs is doing, and I looked at in comparison to the CPN in the UK and the US, and I think we're ahead of the game. I'll make that as a comment. But what I'm interested in is Brian talked a little bit about the legislative framework to support the security industry. There's two elements. One, do you expect the Attorney General's Department and Home Affairs to work together to create a more holistic approach to security licensing, expertise, etc.? And the second part of the question is the Attorney General's Department ran a very successful program in their training centre, which was abandoned at some point. Would you see a good capacity for Home Affairs and industry to bring something like that back again?
And the training program, can you just expand on that?
It was the training centre. It was a training centre for security people. Planning government was open to industry to bring people up to what was the original PSPF.
Right, yeah.
And what it did, there was a bespoke premises owned by the Attorney General's Department just behind the Chinese Embassy, but that's another story. And so they brought in people from industry, and more importantly, if you had a baseline equivalent clearance, a NEGVET 1, you could come along to that and you get the briefings that you needed to do your threat assessment, particularly in the areas of espionage and terrorism. It was a portfolio activity of Attorney Generals, but when things moved I think one of the secretaries decided they weren't in the training business, which no one else has picked it up. But I think there's an opportunity between the TISN work and yourselves as we move forward to get back involved and engaged in that. And that's, I guess, my question. Can we look forward to something like that in due course?
Thank you. Great question that I don't really have an answer to, but through the TISN, I think particularly if there are things that you have seen that work well in practice in industry, we are open to having conversations around those type of things. You know, our SOCI model, of course, is about uplifting industry and supporting industry to do the best they can to manage these risks. So quite interested. I'm not specifically aware of those initiatives because I haven't been around long enough, but they sound like they're worthy of further exploration. But absolutely, we'd be interested to hear more if you don't already have a channel into the department to talk about it. Okay.
Terrific. Please thank Justine Jones.
Thank you.